Zahira Kandel thought she had everything: wealth, status, and the perfect husband, Marcel Duvane. But when she uncovered his secret affair with their young maid, Lira Montefalco, the glamorous life inside their Dubai villa twisted into a nightmare. Within weeks, the betrayal spiraled into fire, death, and a shocking investigation led by Inspector Rahim Fadel and forensic expert Dr. Elara Crosse. What began as whispers of infidelity ended as one of Dubai's most chilling true crime stories. Zahira Kandel lived in a world many could only dream about. The grand villa stood like a palace in one of Dubai's most luxurious neighborhoods, its white stone walls gleaming under the desert sun. From the outside, her life looked perfect. She had a husband, Marcel Duvane, whose business ventures brought in wealth from all corners of the world. Their home was filled with rare art pieces, imported cars, and a constant flow of expensive goods that displayed their high status. Guests who visited left with envy in their hearts, whispering about how Zahira had everything: a wealthy husband, an extravagant home, and a life without struggle. But behind the expensive doors and spotless marble floors, something darker lurked. Marcel was no longer the man Zahira once knew. In the early years, their marriage seemed strong, full of passion and plans for the future. They had traveled across continents, attended glamorous parties, and been photographed at high-profile events. Yet as time went on, Marcel grew distant. Business trips became more frequent, and his excuses for late nights felt thin and rehearsed. Zahira would sit by the grand windows of their villa, staring out at the glittering city lights, wondering why her husband no longer looked at her the way he once did. She told herself it was only stress from his growing empire. Marcel had always been ambitious, and with success came responsibility. But then there were the small things she could not ignore. His suits carried faint traces of perfume that did not belong to her. The bedsheets smelled freshly laundered, more often than they should. Once, Zahira discovered a pair of earrings missing from her jewelry collection, only to later find them tucked away in a drawer she never used. None of these details were enough to prove anything, but they formed a puzzle she could not put together. In her heart, she felt a quiet storm brewing. Friends who envied her wealth had no idea she was slowly drowning in suspicion. Every dinner she shared with Marcel felt colder than the last. He would scroll through his phone, distracted, while she pushed food around her plate. The silence between them stretched long, heavy, and unbearable. The once lively home had become a cage where Zahira felt invisible. The only thing that kept her from falling apart was the determination to uncover the truth. One afternoon, while cleaning through Marcel's study, Zahira noticed something that would change everything. A second phone was hidden behind books in his office cabinet. It wasn't the phone she saw him use every day. Her heart raced as she held the device in her hands, hesitating before powering it on. When she finally unlocked it, the truth unfolded before her eyes. There were messages, carefully hidden away, each one written with words that cut her deeper than any blade could. Marcel had been meeting someone secretly, showering them with affection and promises. Zahira's eyes burned as she scrolled, feeling her heart splinter with every new message she read. Her suspicion had been right all along. The perfect marriage was only an illusion. Yet, what shocked her most was not the betrayal itself, but the identity of the other woman. It was not a glamorous socialite or a business partner's wife. It was someone under her very roof, someone she had dismissed as invisible. The young Filipina maid, Lira Montefalco, had quietly slipped into the role of her husband's secret companion. The betrayal felt unbearable. Zahira's hands trembled as she placed the phone back in its hiding spot. That night, as Marcel returned home late, once again, Zahira sat in silence, her mind spiraling. The image of her husband with Lira consumed her thoughts. The grandeur of the villa, the expensive art, and the glittering wealth around her suddenly felt meaningless. None of it could mask the hollow truth. She was a wife betrayed, a woman whose world had been shattered in silence. For the first time, Zahira began to feel that her life, built on luxury and appearances, had no value left. And in that emptiness, something dangerous began to grow. Zahira Kandel could hardly sleep after the discovery of the hidden phone. The screen burned in her mind, every message echoing with betrayal. She replayed the words again and again, each line sharper than the last, cutting through whatever hope she had left for her marriage. What unsettled her most was not simply that Marcel had strayed, but that he had chosen Lira Montefalco, the maid who moved silently through their home. Lira had always seemed shy, almost invisible, never raising her voice, never daring to cross the line between employer and servant. Zahira had viewed her as insignificant, a girl without power or presence. Yet here she was, the center of her husband's secret life. The humiliation festered like a wound that refused to heal. Zahira could not stop imagining them together in the villa she had carefully decorated, in the same spaces where she and Marcel once built memory. The living room where she hosted dignitaries and business associates, the guest room she used to keep pristine for family visits, the kitchen where she supervised elaborate meals, each place now felt contaminated. Every corner of her home whispered of betrayal. Even the smell of detergent clinging to fresh sheets seemed like a cruel reminder of the intimacy she was not part of. Zahira began to observe more closely, pretending not to notice while her eyes missed nothing. She studied Marcel's gestures, the way his hand lingered when passing Lira a plate, the faint smile he gave her when he thought no one was watching. Lira's eyes darted nervously whenever Zahira entered the room, and the tension in the air became suffocating. It was not an open confession, but it was enough. The silence, the stolen glances, and the unspoken guilt between them confirmed what the messages had already revealed. Each day Zahira felt herself unraveling. The wealth surrounding her seemed like a prison lined with gold, trapping her in a life of appearances that meant nothing anymore. She had once believed that money could secure loyalty, that luxury could protect her from the miseries other women faced. But here she was, betrayed under the same roof she considered her sanctuary. The villa no longer looked like home, it had turned into a stage for deceit. At night she wandered the empty halls, her footsteps echoing against marble floors, her mind filled with scenes she imagined but could not bear to see. She pictured Marcel whispering words of love he no longer said to her, pictured Lira's face tilted in adoration, pictured them laughing quietly in the shadows, while she lay in bed pretending to sleep. The betrayal had not only broken her heart, but had stripped her of dignity. She felt mocked in her own home, dethroned in a palace she once ruled. Zahira's thoughts began to darken. At first she wondered if she should confront Marcel, demand explanations, force him to choose between loyalty and disgrace. But every time she imagined standing before him, she also imagined his lies, his excuses, his calm face denying everything. The anger inside her told her that words would never be enough. Marcel had crossed a line, and Lira had dared to follow him. Together they had taken everything from her, the love of her husband, the sanctity of her home, and the respect she believed she commanded. One afternoon, Zahira stood in front of the mirror staring at her reflection. The woman who looked back was no longer the glamorous wife admired at parties. She saw tired eyes, clenched jaws, and a face hollowed by rage. She felt as though she had been reduced to nothing, invisible in her own marriage, while Lira the maid had stolen her place. That realization poisoned her thoughts further. It was not only betrayal but humiliation, the kind that burned deeper than grief. The days that followed were filled with silence, but inside Zahira's mind, chaos raged. She began imagining ways to reclaim her power, to erase the stain that had been left on her life. Every glance between Marcel and Lira fed her fury. Every reminder of their secret drove her closer to the edge. She no longer thought of saving her marriage. She thought only of punishment, of consequences that would match the scale of her suffering. Zahira's love for Marcel had withered, leaving behind only rage and an unshakable determination that the people who destroyed her life would not escape unscathed. The night had been thick with heat, the kind of heavy Dubai air that clung to skin and slowed every breath. Zahira Kandel moved silently through the grand villa, her bare feet pressing against the cold marble floors. The plan had been building inside her for days, a storm that could no longer be contained. Her suspicion had grown into certainty, her pain into hatred, and hatred into something far more dangerous. She had decided that Marcel and Lira would not simply be confronted. They would pay in the most final way. She had prepared carefully, as though her rage required precision. Days earlier she had purchased containers of gasoline from a station far enough from their neighborhood to avoid questions. She had hidden them in the garage, where they remained unnoticed among Marcel's collection of cars. The thought of those containers waiting in silence filled her with a grim satisfaction. Tonight, she told herself, would be the night everything ended. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Marcel had retired to the guest room under the excuse of needing to work late, but Zahira knew the truth. Lira was with him, tucked away behind closed doors, believing their secret was safe. Zahira stood in the dark hallway, her heart hammering as she listened. She could hear faint sounds from within, not voices but the unmistakable rhythm of presence. That was all she needed. She moved quickly, her actions sharp and deliberate. The first container was heavy in her hands. As she carried it upstairs, careful to avoid spilling too soon, she poured it along the hallway carpet, the smell filling the air with sharp intensity. Another container followed, the liquid seeping into corners, creeping under the guest room door. The house, once her sanctuary, now became her weapon. Every pore felt like justice, every drop like an answer to the humiliation she had endured. Her breathing grew uneven as she worked, yet she forced herself to remain quiet. She locked the villa's main exits, securing every door with precision. Windows were latched shut, leaving no escape. She told herself this was not madness, it was balance. They had taken her pride, her trust, her life. Tonight she would take theirs. When the last container was emptied, Zahira stood in silence, the smell of gasoline suffocating the air. Her hands trembled as she pulled a box of matches from her pocket. For a long moment she stared at the thin wooden sticks, so fragile yet holding the power to end everything. She thought of Marcel's distant eyes, Lira's nervous glances, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her like chain. Her mind flashed with images of their secret, images that had haunted her nights. In those images, she always stood alone, discarded, invisible. That was about to change. She struck the first match. The flame was small, almost insignificant, but it felt like the world had shifted. She held it steady, watching the orange glow flicker against the shadows of the hallway. Then she let it fall. The fire caught instantly, racing across the gasoline-soaked carpet like a beast unleashed. The air filled with heat and smoke as the flames roared to life. The quiet villa transformed into an inferno, devouring everything in its path. Zahira stood at a distance, her eyes wide as the blaze grew higher, consuming the guest room door. From inside came muffled chaos, frantic movements, the sound of terror too late to matter. The flames spread quickly, curling up the walls, shattering the glass, and swallowing the silence. Zahira felt no fear as she watched, only a cold stillness deep within her. This was not rage anymore, it was resolution. The fire became her witness, her accomplice, her final declaration that she would not be forgotten. She would not be humiliated. Outside, the night sky lit up with orange light, and neighbors began to stir. Some ran into the street, pointing at the smoke that rose like a black signal into the humid air. Sirens were called, but by the time firefighters arrived, the villa was already consumed. Marcel and Lira never made it out. Their bodies were discovered later, burned beyond recognition, locked together in one final embrace. Zahira stood among the neighbors, her face streaked with feigned tears, her voice trembling as she played the role of the devastated widow. No one knew the truth she carried in her silence. The villa was gone, her marriage reduced to ash, and the people who had betrayed her erased by fire. She had succeeded, and for a brief moment, in the smoke and destruction, Zahira felt a hollow sense of triumph. The aftermath of the fire was chaos. What had once been a symbol of wealth and status was now reduced to blackened ruins and piles of ash. The villa's white walls, once gleaming in the Dubai sun, were charred and cracked, standing like tombstones against the smoke-filled sky. Neighbors gathered behind yellow caution tape, whispering about the tragedy, their voices filled with shock and pity for Zahira Kandel. To them she was the grieving widow who had lost her husband, and the maid in a sudden horrifying accident. But to Inspector Rahim Fadel, something about the scene did not sit right. He arrived in the early morning, the heat from the fire still radiating through the ground. His trained eyes scanned the wreckage carefully, looking past the sympathy others offered to Zahira. Fires told stories, and he had learned to listen. The first sign that drew his attention was the unusual speed at which the flames had spread. Ordinary house fires rarely consumed a villa this quickly. This blaze had been merciless, leaving no time for escape. It suggested the presence of accelerants, something deliberately introduced to feed the flames. Dr. Elara Crosse, the forensic pathologist called to examine the scene, moved with equal precision. She crouched near what remained of the guest room, her gloves brushing against charred wood and melted furniture. In her report she noted patterns along the floor, unnatural burn trails that hinted at liquid having been poured. Samples collected from the debris confirmed the suspicion. Traces of gasoline clung to the walls, soaked deep into the remnants of carpet fibers. This was no accident, it was deliberate, methodical, and merciless. Meanwhile Zahira played her part flawlessly. She stood among the crowd, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses, weeping when people looked her way, whispering words of devastation into sympathetic ears. She spoke of Marcel as a devoted husband, of the maid as a quiet presence in their home. But Rahim noticed her composure, the controlled way she addressed each question, as if she had rehearsed her grief. Grief, he knew, was messy and unpredictable. Zahira's sorrow was too neat. Witness statements began to surface. A neighbor recalled seeing Zahira outside moments before the fire spread, strangely calm as smoke started to rise. Another remembered how she had been walking toward the street, rather than toward the villa, as the first sparks became visible. These details, though small, gnawed at Rahim's instinct. They painted a picture of someone not caught off guard, but someone who already knew what was about to happen. The strongest piece of evidence emerged when security footage from a neighboring property was recovered. Grainy yet clear enough, the video showed Zahira in the days before the fire, loading large containers into her vehicle. Investigators traced the purchases back to a gas station. Receipts bore her name. The puzzle pieces aligned with precision. The accelerant, the locked doors, the absence of escape, all pointed in one direction. The widow was not a victim, she was the architect of the tragedy. When Rahim confronted the possibility, the weight of motive fell into place. Through discreet questioning, he learned whispers of Marcel's unfaithfulness. Some of the house staff admitted they had noticed unusual closeness between him and Lira Montefalco. Though no one dared to say it openly, the rumors supported a narrative of betrayal, one strong enough to ignite fury. It was no longer a case of a tragic accident. It was a crime rooted in humiliation, revenge, and fire. Behind closed doors, the evidence was gathered carefully. Photographs of burn trails, chemical reports confirming gasoline, testimonies of neighbors, and the incriminating footage were all compiled into a file that spoke louder than Zahira's tears. When the time came, she was taken quietly from her temporary residence, away from the whispers of sympathy that had surrounded her since the night of the blaze. The arrest sent ripples through the community.
The widow who had stood before cameras as a picture of tragedy was now painted as a murderer. The case dominated headlines, shocking the public with its blend of wealth, betrayal, and cold calculation. For Inspector Rahim Fadel, there was no satisfaction in the arrest, only the grim acknowledgement that the truth had been uncovered. What remained was a trial that would reveal just how deep betrayal could cut, and how far a woman like Zahira was willing to go when her pride was shattered. The courtroom was silent when Zahira Kandel was led inside, her wrists bound in steel, her face hidden beneath carefully applied makeup that could not mask the coldness in her eyes. The trial had attracted enormous attention, not only in Dubai but across the region. The story was irresistible to the media. A wealthy woman, betrayed by her husband, accused of setting the fire that killed both him and their young maid. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, and newspapers painted her as everything from a scorned victim to a calculating killer. Inside, however, the drama unfolded with grim precision. The prosecution opened its case with stark evidence. Photographs of the villa's blackened remains were laid out for the court to see. Images of charred furniture, melted glass, and twisted beams were projected, each one reminding everyone of the brutality of the fire. Then came the forensic reports from Dr. Elara Crosse. She explained in detail how the fire had moved unnaturally fast, pointing to the presence of accelerants. Her words carried the weight of science, leaving little room for doubt. Gasoline residues had been found in nearly every corner of the guest room, and the hallway leading to the fire, she concluded, had been intentional. Inspector Rahim Fadel testified next, his calm voice steady as he recounted the investigation. He described how neighbors had seen Zahira outside moments before the fire began, how she appeared unusually composed, and how she had been seen days earlier purchasing containers of gasoline. The footage from a nearby security camera was then shown to the court. Though grainy, the image of Zahira unloading heavy containers into her garage struck with undeniable force. It was the moment the courtroom seemed to shift, the collective realization that the grieving widow had orchestrated the inferno. Zahira's defense tried to counter with arguments of grief and confusion. They painted her as a woman devastated by loss, suggesting the gasoline had been purchased for household maintenance. They claimed the neighbors' accounts were unreliable, colored by the shock of the night. Yet their words struggled against the clarity of evidence. The accelerant trails, the locked exits, and the deliberate planning all formed a picture too precise to dismiss. As the trial moved forward, the affair between Marcel and Lira emerged as a centerpiece. Private messages retrieved from Marcel's hidden phone were read aloud, revealing his affection for the maid. They spoke of secret meetings, of promises whispered in stolen hours. The courtroom gasped as details surfaced of how Lira had become more than an employee, stepping into a role that Zahira believed belonged only to her. These revelations provided the motive that prosecutors needed. Betrayal had fueled Zahira's rage, and revenge had lit the match. One of the most chilling moments came when the forensic team revealed a detail hidden in the final embrace of the victims. Marcel and Lira had been found holding one another tightly, their bodies fused together by the flame. It was a haunting image, proof that even in their final moments, they had clung to each other. To the court, it underscored the depth of Zahira's humiliation. To Zahira, sitting motionless at the defense table, it was a cruel reminder that her husband's loyalty had belonged elsewhere, even in death. The trial stretched on for weeks, but the verdict came swiftly once the jury withdrew to deliberate. Zahira Kandel was found guilty of double murder by arson. The courtroom was still when the sentence was announced, life imprisonment. She showed no tears as the words were spoken, only a rigid stillness, her eyes fixed ahead as though refusing to acknowledge the weight of her downfall. The woman who had once lived in luxury, surrounded by art and wealth, now faced the rest of her days behind concrete walls and iron bars. Her fortune was seized, her name dragged through headlines, her reputation turned to ash much like the villa she had burned. The world outside remembered her not as the glamorous wife she once presented herself to be, but as the woman who allowed jealousy and rage to consume her until she destroyed everything. For Inspector Rahim and Dr. Crosse, the case was closed, but its echoes linger. It was a story of love twisted into betrayal, of wealth masking emptiness, and of fire becoming the cruel tool of revenge. Zahira had tried to erase her humiliation in flames, but instead, she carved her name into history as one of Dubai's most chilling criminals.